Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Sarah. In today's video, I would like to make the Seamwork Handsy top in 3 different ways, and I originally had this idea because going through my handmade summer wardrobe, I realized that I am very much drawn to making more formal skirts and dresses and that I am missing tops, just basic tops in my wardrobe, especially for more informal or casual occasions such as puttering around the house or going for a walk on the weekend. And so I've been looking for the perfect t-shirt pattern, and I think I have found it in the Seamwork Handsy top, mostly because it is designed for woven fabrics versus stretch fabrics, which is perfect for the summertime when you want to wear fabrics such as cottons and linens that breathe versus stretchy fabrics that are really close to your body. In addition, I find that the shape is really beautiful, so it's not too fitted, not too boxy. It has easy to sew elements such as a cut-on sleeve, so no sleeve head to insert. It has a patch pocket, which is one of the easiest kinds of pockets to create, and then bust darts for shaping, and it has a really beautiful neckline, so not too wide and bateau and not too close to the neck, but this really beautiful oval shape. And so I'm excited to make it. I also thought it would be interesting to show you how I make these 3 versions because it is a free beginner sewing pattern, perfect for a beginner sewist looking to get into their very first project. And because it is free, you can download it and get working on it right away. I know that the price of patterns and materials and getting into sewing is sometimes what keeps people from trying it, and therefore because one of Seamwork's main objectives is to welcome new sewists into the sewing community and get them started, it is a perfect resource for getting into sewing. Also, for those of you who have more experience and who have already been sewing for quite some time, I thought it would be interesting to show you how I made these 3 versions because I'm going to be manipulating the pattern a little bit and changing it a little bit to suit each one and then personalizing it in different ways that perhaps might give you ideas. I am also pleased to announce that Seamwork is the sponsor of this video, and it is such an honor to be working with Seamwork because I learned to sew with their patterns. In addition to sponsoring this video, Seamwork is offering this channel 2 discount links, the first being $100 off their Learn to Sew video course for absolute beginners, and the second is a link to 50% off their Seamwork Unlimited membership. Seamwork members get access to over 200 contemporary sewing patterns, dozens of sew-along videos, discount codes to fabric shops all over the world, and access to a sewing community of thousands of sewists where you can ask questions, post projects, and connect with sewists near you. But even if you're not interested in these 2 offers, I highly recommend checking out Seamwork. They have lots of free resources for learning how to sew on their podcasts, YouTube channel, and website. And even if you have more experience, you will find a plethora of creative inspiration and new techniques to inspire you, even if you have dozens of years of experience in sewing. I highly recommend checking them out. So now let me show you what I'll be making. The first version of this top I will be making in this really beautiful textured white cotton. I think that it is a single layer gauze, and I found it in a haberdashery in Frankfurt, Germany, where I go once a year for work, and I got very lucky in that I found a fabric shop and haberdashery not far from the hotel I stay in, and now I make it a point to go there every year when I get a chance. And I found last year this really beautiful cotton. I don't know if you can see. It's got this really, really beautiful texture. It is somewhat transparent, as in you can definitely see through it. And so I will be making this version with the original design, so with the patch pockets and the original length and sleeves. The only thing that I'll be changing is that for the facings, if I use the same fabric for the facings, it will definitely show through. You can see here. And so I will be using this sort of light peach, sort of nude, because it's pretty close to my skin tone, viscose to make the facings. I will have to use interfacing to make it a little bit thicker because otherwise it doesn't match the weight of the fabric, but I think that with this fabric underneath, it won't be as see-through, at least for the facings, to finish the neckline. And so especially in this very classic white color, I think it will be a really versatile piece in my wardrobe, but also with this beautiful texture, I think it'll add a little bit to any piece, so a little bit more elevated than just a regular white t-shirt. And so I'm excited to make this, and I think that this will be the easiest version to make and to follow along to. For the this first version, as well as the two other versions, I cut out the pattern size extra small based on my bust measurement of 81 centimeters or 32 inches. The only other modification that I added to this pattern for this version is I added an extra 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch to the bottom hem depth. This creates a deeper hem, which I prefer in cotton and linen or stable fabrics because it creates a very stable, sort of smooth hem, and I find that it's really beautiful finishing. It does take up more fabric, and the original hem depth would have been absolutely fine as well. This is just personal preference. Once all of the pieces were cut out in the main fabric, the viscose facings, and the interfacing, I marked the darts and the pocket placement on the right side of the front piece in the main fabric. The next preparation step was to interface the viscose facings. This way the facings would match the weight and the drape of the main fabric. I used a lightweight interfacing meant for light cottons, rayons, and even light jersey fabrics. And then all of the pieces were all cut out, prepped, and ready to sew. The first sewing step is to stay stitch the neckline of the main fabric and the facings with a short stitch length. I use 1 millimeter. And then it was time to sew the darts. To do so, I fold the fabric at the center of the dart, matching the notched edges of the dart, and then pinning along the sewing line traced from the pattern. Then I sew them up, finishing at the dart point with a short 1 millimeter stitch length without backstitching. I make sure to leave extra thread at the dart end so that I can knot it off twice by hand to create a subtle and precise dart point. And once those were sewn up and pressed towards the hem, it was time to work on the pocket. The first step is to finish the pocket edges with either an overlocker, a faux overlocker stitch on your sewing machine, or a zigzag stitch. I have a faux overlocker foot and stitch on my machine, and so that's what I used. To create the pocket shape before attaching it to the front piece, you press the pocket edges in and then top stitch the pocket top edge, and then it's ready to be positioned on the right side of the front piece, matching the corners to the pocket placement circles traced from the pattern. Then you edge stitch the pocket in place about 1 to 2 millimeters from the edge on the sides and bottom edges without stopping, and then the pattern suggests adding bar tacks, so I did so at the top 2 corners of the pockets, right where it opens, to reinforce that top edge. Next, it's time to sew up the shoulder seams. The instructions say to finish each seam allowance separately and then sew them together and press the seam allowances apart. But I decided because this fabric is a little bit more delicate and a little bit more openly woven, I wanted to finish the seam allowances together. So first I sewed and then I trimmed the seam allowance edge, finished them together, and then pressed both edges together towards the back. This creates a little bit more reinforcement along that seam so that it stays nice and strong. Then it was time to attach the front and the back at the side seams, right sides together. And the instructions say to reinforce the stitching at the underarm a bit by stitching just about 1 to 2 millimeters outside of the main stitch within the seam allowance. Then you can trim down the seam allowance. I usually trim it down by half. Finish those seam allowances together. I use the faux overlocking stitch again, and then press both seam allowances towards the back piece. Then it's time to work on the facing pieces by attaching them at the shoulder seams, sewing them right sides together, and then pressing the seam allowances open. Then you're meant to finish the outer edge of the facing. I once again used the faux overlock stitch with my sewing machine, but you can also zigzag stitch that, or if you have an overlocking machine, overlock it with that. And then stitch the facing to the neckline, matching up these shoulder seams. And make sure to pay attention to the seam allowance here because it is smaller than the regular seam allowance through the rest of the pattern. It is 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch versus 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. And then to finish the neckline edge so that it is neat and smooth, there are a few steps to take, and these are all detailed in the pattern. But first you notch the seam allowances with little triangles every inch or so along the seam allowance, making sure not to cut through the main stitching line. Then with the seam allowance that is the furthest from the main fabric, when the facings are pressed to the inside of the garment, then trim this one down to about 1/2 its original length so that the seam allowances are graded and sit nice and flat on the inside of the neckline. Then press the seam allowances and the facings away from the main fabric, and then edge stitch the seam allowances to the facing at about 2 millimeters from the stitching line to prevent the facings from rolling to the outside of the neckline, and then press the facings to the inside of the neckline for a nice clean finish. Then to create a nice smooth neckline and to make sure that the facing doesn't flip to the outside of the garment, the instructions say to edge stitch the facing to the main fabric all around the bottom edge of the facing. To do so and to make sure that it was nice and smooth on the inside, I first made sure that both the main fabric and the facing were pressed neatly, and then I pinned the facing to the main fabric all along, making sure that the shoulder seams matched up, and then I stitched all along the edge of the facing with the shirt inside out rather than top stitching from the outside, so that I could see exactly what I was doing, and it was about 3 centimeters from the neckline edge, and I tried to keep that stitching line nice and smooth around the edge because it will be visible from the outside of the garment. And I used a stitch length of about 2.8 millimeters, a little bit longer than what I usually use for the inside of the garment, so that it's nice and smooth on the outside. And then for the final step, the hems. First I worked on the sleeve hems by folding them up 1/4 of an inch and then 3/8 of an inch as planned by the pattern originally, and then pressing this in place and then sewing along that folded edge. And then for the bottom edge, if you have not modified it as I did by adding an inch to that depth, you fold it up 1/4 and then 3/8 just like the sleeve hem and stitch. But because I added an inch, I first folded it up 5/8 of an inch, pressed, and then folded it up again 1 inch. And then sewed along that folded line for a deeper hem. And then this first version is finished. I'm really happy with the way this first version turned out. It turned out even better than I expected. The fit is just right, it's not too fitted or too loose. The hem sits at the high hip and is easy to wear tucked or untucked. The neckline sits smoothly and the short sleeves don't pop out or sag. And this textured cotton with its more open weave, it's really comfortable and breezy to wear in the summertime in warmer weather. And it is an instant staple in my wardrobe that I'll be able to wear often. So with this version finished and successful, I was ready to start working on the second. So I have finished making the first version. Let me show you what I will be making for my second and third versions. I'll show you the second in a moment, but I wanted to introduce the third version first because it is probably the most challenging one that I will be doing, and I want to get a head start on it because I will be adding some sashiko embroidery to it. So let me show you. I will be making it out of the same fabric as this white textured cotton. I bought this at the same time from the same shop in Frankfurt in Germany as I was buying this white one. It is the same sort of textured cotton fabric, and it is gorgeous. It is in this sea green, sort of bluish green color, and you can see it's already cut out. This is all I have left of it, but it's just absolutely beautiful. And what I would like to do with this one is, rather than making it the exact same version as the first one, I would like to apply an embroidery to it. About 2 months ago, I took 2 sashiko classes with a Japanese association here in Paris. I will link below if you'd like to check it out. But I learned how to make first the Asanoha pattern, which was really fun, and the more basic version. And then in the second class, I learned how to make this version, which is the Seigaiha pattern. And we made this pencil case, and you can see it's this wave pattern, and I think it means the blue ocean or something like that. It's supposed to mimic the waves of the ocean, and I think that's just absolutely beautiful. And I think for a summer top in this sea green color, it's going to be really lovely. So the complications with this one is that not only do I have to figure out how to transfer the pattern to my fabric, which is complicated and took a few tests, but also, as you can see, this fabric, so traditionally sashiko is embroidered onto indigo, like dark blue indigo fabric, for that contrast between the white threads and the indigo blue. Because that was a very popular dye and color back when sashiko was very popular. This is a very historic sort of embroidery, and it was meant to reinforce clothes so that they were warmer, as in you were stitching multiple layers together for warmth. So I will not be doing that with this one, so I have this much lighter, both in weight and in color fabric. So that adds a few complications. So to test it out, I made 2 versions. One just with the fabric by itself. You can see it here. I figured out how to trace it. I found some chalk paper and I traced out the pattern from this original version, but I will show you that in detail in a moment. And then I also, because I was worried about the thickness of this fabric, it just seems very flimsy and not thick enough for sashiko embroidery. I also fully interfaced a piece to see what kind of fabric it would create. And I think that this is what I'm going to be doing because, as you can see, the interfacing makes the fabric and the color a little bit more opaque. And you can see the stitches a lot better, and then it's just much easier to handle because this fabric does have quite an open weave. This sort of makes the weave a little bit more stable. And so I will be doing this. I will be fully interfacing the front and the back pieces of this pattern, and then tracing this Segai-ha pattern from the pattern that I created, and then stitching it. So now let me show you how I did that. First, I traced the front and back pattern pieces onto the fabric and added 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch to the depth of the hem seam allowance, as I did with the first version. I also unfolded the fabric and traced the other side of each piece to have a flat lay of both the front and the back pieces. Then I laid lightweight interfacing over the fabric, matching up the edges, and with the two pieces lightly pinned together, I cut around the pattern shapes to create two squares, one for the front and one for the back, that will be entirely interfaced. I did this because I know that fabric shrinks when it's interfaced, and I wanted to get a rough idea of how much fabric I'd need. I'll retrace the pattern pieces onto the squares of fabric after they've been interfaced. Then I cut out the facings without the interfacing to avoid bulk, since the neckline will already be reinforced with the front and back pieces fully interfaced, although I did stay stitch the necklines of both the facing pieces to keep those edges from relaxing out of shape. Then it was time to block fuse the front and back squares of the fabric, and this took so long. At least 45 minutes per square. Once I finished block fusing the squares and they had cooled down, I retraced the pattern onto the fabric. As predicted, the fabric shrank quite a bit during the blocking process, so I had to retrace all of the lines. Then I thread marked the pattern edges on the front and back pieces, and I traced the seam allowances with chalk to know where to stop and start the embroidery in order to avoid too much bulk in the seam lines. I also thread marked a line down the center front of the front pattern piece to help line up the center of the embroidery pattern and keep it as straight as possible, both vertically and horizontally. I decided that I wanted the Segai-ha pattern to start not from the neckline, but a bit further down. The Segai-ha waves are similar to horizontal stripes, and I often like it when the stripes and striped tops start further down, typically towards the bottom of the arm side. In the French marinière style, I think it looks really elegant that way. So I used my first handsy top to measure down to where I wanted the pattern to start, which was 8 centimeters down, and then added the 1 centimeter seam allowance at the neckline. So I positioned the paper Segai-ha pattern that I had traced out so that it started 9 centimeters down from the center front neckline. And then, as I had with the two samples I created, I traced the pattern with some chalk paper on a self-healing mat and with a tracing wheel, pressing down firmly. And then the front was all ready to be embroidered. So now the sashiko embroidery pattern is now sketched onto my fabric, onto my interfaced fabric with the basting outline of the pattern, which took hours. And then also tracing the Segai-ha pattern took about 2.5 hours as well. And so I've made the decision to only embroider the front rather than the front and the back because I spent a long time trying to trace the same pattern so that it matched along these side seams of the front and the back, and it was just impossible to keep it straight. It was just not going to work. And so I also didn't want to spend another few hours on it because I'm a little bit short on time. I'd like to finish both these versions, the second and the third, in the next week because in about 6 days I will be leaving on summer vacation to the west coast of the United States to go visit my family. And so I'd like to finish this project before then, and I'm a little bit short on time. But now that I've set up this embroidery here, I can start working on it in downtime while I'm working on the second version, and I think it's going to go pretty well. Now let me show you what I'm going to be making for the second version. I decided to go with a very exciting fabric that I have left over from another fabric. It is this cotton voile with this Indian block print, so hand printed and tile printed design with these flowers. And I just love the colors in these, the pink and the blues and the light green, and I think it's just absolutely beautiful. But as you can see, it's a little bit transparent. I originally made this one in a Charlie caftan by Closet Core Patterns, and I love that. I wear it all the time as a beach cover-up in the summertime, but I have about 3/4 of a meter left, which is enough to make this top again, and so I will be making it out of this one. But because it's a little bit, oops, but because it's a little bit transparent, you can maybe see here a little bit how transparent it is. I would like to fully underline it. I mean, I could make it transparent, it's fine. I can just wear like a camisole underneath and that would also be a nice style, I think. But to show you a different technique and something a little bit more difficult, I will be fully underlining it with this cotton voile. And it's white, and so if I layer one over the other, let me show you what it does. So now with the white cotton voile layered behind this block printed cotton voile fabric, you can see that the background becomes much more white and opaque, and it's a lot less see-through. And so I find that the block printed flowers sort of pop out a lot more, and they're, I don't know, I think it's really pretty with the background a little bit more white. I think you can see the difference here if I do this. So this side is without and this is with, and you can see that the white is much more white and not as transparent with the cotton voile. And so that's what I'll be doing. I'll be fully underlining both the front and the back with the cotton voile, which means that I won't need facings because I'll be using the interlining or lining as the facing, or to finish the edge of the neckline. And then I think what I'll do is then I'll turn it, once I turn it inside after stitching at the neckline, so before attaching the shoulder seams, and then I'll use it as an interlining, as in I will sew it as if it's one piece of fabric. And so hopefully that'll go well. I think that I'm really excited to be using this fabric because I've had this remnant in my stash for a few years now, and I think it'll be really, really beautiful in this top. So I'm excited to get to that. For this version, I first cut out the front and back pieces out of the main block printed fabric. Once again, as with the first version, I folded both selvages towards the middle, and to mark the center front and back folds, I used a ruler to create a crisp folded edge. I did not modify the hem depth with this one as it'll be a lighter version and I didn't want a deep hem showing through to the front and being more opaque than the rest of the garment. To cut out these pieces, I just made it. This is a very narrow fabric and I used every last millimeter of even these selvages to cut them out. As for the first version, I marked the dart placement on the inside of the front piece and then also the pocket placements on the right side of the front piece. For this pocket, I tried pattern matching as best as I could by overlaying a piece of the main fabric over the front and then matching the flower motifs before tracing and cutting out the pocket piece. Block printed fabrics are typically printed by hand. I think that's how this fabric was created as well, and so it's not machine made with machine precision, so the flower motifs don't match up exactly, but I aimed to do so as best as I could, and I think it turned out pretty well. I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but I purchased this fabric from the shop Delika, located in Arles in the south of France, and I'll link it below in case one day you'd like to visit. They have a beautiful selection of Indian block printed cotton fabrics. Then instead of facings, I cut out an underlining with the white cotton voile by cutting out the front and back pieces again. This underlining matches the weight and the drape of the main cotton fabric pretty well. To reinforce the necklines and prevent them from distorting, I fused the underlining neckline with reinforced bias tape, and then stay stitched the main fabric neckline after changing my needle to a thinner needle for lighter fabrics. From then on, this is where I deviated from the order of the pattern steps to make this underlined version work. So first, I stitched the necklines together of the main fabric and their corresponding underlining fabrics, right sides together and front and back separately, so before sewing the side or the shoulder seams, and then trimmed, graded, clipped, and understitched to finish the necklines separately. Then I turned the underlining fabric to the inside of both the front and back pieces, wrong sides together, and basted the main fabric and the underlining fabrics together with a long machine stitch, about 4 millimeters long, to create one front, one back, and one pocket piece, each fully underlined. And from then on, the main fabric and underlining were attached and no longer sewed separately. Next, I sewed the darts with the main fabric and underlining together in one layer, in the same way I sewed them in the first version. Then I attached the underlined pocket exactly as I did with the first version as well. Then I sewed the shoulder seams with French seams, which effectively encloses the seam allowances and is very useful for creating strong seams, even with very light and delicate fabrics like these. And then I pressed the seam allowances, once sewed up, towards the back. I did the same at the side seams, sewing with French seams and enclosing the reinforcement stitching line close to the main stitching line at the underarm within. Then I sewed up the sleeve and bottom hems at the original 5/8 length, first folding them up and pressing at 1/4 of an inch and then a second time at 3/8 of an inch before stitching close to the folded edge. And then this second version was also finished, and I am very pleased with the way it turned out. In the meantime, I spent many hours embroidering my special sashiko version. I used both a sashiko needle and white cotton sashiko thread that I bought during my recent honeymoon in Japan. It was slow at first to get started, especially because I was freestyling for the first time without the stitch lengths marked on the fabric as they had been in the classes that I took. In sashiko, the stitch length is meant to be about 3 millimeters long and each stitch about 2 millimeters apart. Then I got into the swing of things, and during my free time and over many hours, I stitched and stitched and stitched until it was finally done. So then I cut out the front and the back along the traced lines, and then it was time to sew it up just like the first version, but without the front pocket. So first, the darts. This distorts the Segaha pattern at the side seams, but I didn't see a way around it, and I wanted the shaping that the darts create, so I decided to sew it up that way. Then I sewed up the shoulder seams and finished the seam allowances separately with my machine's faux overlock stitch and pressed them apart. Then the side seams, and I trimmed and finished the seam allowances together and pressed them towards the back. And then it was time to work on the neckline, sewing the facings together and then to the main neckline, grading and trimming the seam allowances, understitching the seam allowances to the facing, and then top stitching the facing in place. And then it was already time to sew up the hems, which I did the same way as I sewed up the hems of the first version. And then this last version was finished. And what a feat! I finished just in time before leaving on summer vacation. Of these 3 versions, I am the most proud of this one, especially since I wasn't sure that it was going to work or turn out alright. The contrast between the color of the fabric and the sashiko thread is subtle, and it's going to have to be handled delicately when I wash it, but I'm so happy with the way it turned out. This is the first time I've tried incorporating embroidery in a sewing project, and I'm very glad I tried it. I am really pleased with how all 3 of these tops turned out. It's the end of the summer now, but I'm sure I'll find ways to style them into early autumn, and these are definitely wardrobe staples that I'll be wearing for years to come. I hope that seeing how I made these 3 versions either encourages you to try sewing your very first project, or if you do have sewing experience, that it gives you customization ideas for this pattern or others. Don't forget to check out the links to this free pattern and the discounts in the description below if you're interested. And thanks again to Seamwork for sponsoring this video. If you enjoyed this video, don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos from me. Thank you for watching. I hope you are all doing well, and I will be back with a new video very soon. Take care and bye-bye.